So thank you everybody who is able to attend today in person for our next collab presents with the lovely team from PEEP. So through the BCCDC, they have the Professionals for Ethical Engagement of Peers, and they're going to give us an update on what has been happening with PEEP through this entire, well, 8 years, so throughout the entire overdose crisis here in BC. So I'm going to pass it to Jane and the rest of the PEEP team to give us a fantastic presentation. Thanks, Jane.
Thanks, Brittany, and welcome everyone. I'm Jane Buxton, and I was the medical lead for harm reduction at the BC Centre for Disease Control until July 2022. And I had the privilege to be the lead investigator for the original PEEP study, which started back in 2015. And I've been delighted to see the evolution of PEEP. I'm grateful to live, learn and love on the stolen territories of the Coast Salish people. And today there's going to be Iesha Hendersen, Charlene Burmeister and Kurt Locke and we're really excited to share This is PEEP and the findings really we're presenting on behalf of all PEEP members and all staff, both past and present. Just to clarify, the opinions we express are those of us, the presenters, and are not endorsed by BC Centre for Disease Control or the Ministry of Health. And we will try and have some questions and discussion at the end, rather than having too much interruptions as we go along. The This is PEEP study was performed across what we colonially know as British Columbia. And we acknowledge that Indigenous peoples live on these lands that originate from their own respective territories and the charter communities of the Métis Nation BC and Inuit. This study was conducted from the BC Centre for Disease Control, which is on the traditional, ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We also recognise the trauma and grief that people who use substances and their loved ones suffer due to the unregulated drug emergency. At least 6 preventable deaths occur every day in BC, and more than 2,500 deaths occurred in 2023, which was the highest annual number ever reported. So I will now hand it over to Charlene to take over.
Thank you, Jane. Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Charlene Burmeister, and I'm the person with lived and living experience stakeholder engagement lead at the BCCDC, but also the founder and executive director of the drug user organization in northern BC called the Coalition of Substance Users of the North. Would also like to respectfully acknowledge that I'm calling in from the unceded traditional and ancestral territory of the Lataco Dene Nation. And appreciate everyone attending today. So we're just going to talk a bit about the background of PEEP. And so PEEP was originally, the acronym stood for Peer Engagement and Evaluation Project, which began in 2015 as a research project. Peer research assistants led focus groups within the regions of BC to explore harm reduction services. This led to the creation of best practices for peer engagement and the peer payment guidance document as well. PEEP was an advisory group of people with lived and living experience of drug use that work closely with the BCCDC. Currently, there are 11 members from across BC representing all geographical health regions. Each PEEP member is a prominent advocate for people who use drugs in their community. PEEP continues to author and contribute to reports and peer-reviewed work that has been not previously collated. There has been no assessment of what PEEP means to its members, staff, or people consult with PEEP or PEEP's impact. That's why this project was super important and close to our hearts. At an in-person meeting, December 22, PEEP members were asked if they were interested in reflecting on PEEP. All were very supportive and chose the name This is PEEP for this study. Just reflecting on the membership of PEEP currently has lots of strong advocates, some who are leaders in their own drug user organizations, some working within health authorities, and just a really strong group of people. And I am going to, just the picture here is of a current planning meeting that we had. Unfortunately, Jenny McDougall is not in this photo, but this is the lovely gaggle of PEEP members here in front of you. Myself, Jessica Lamb, Paul Chanceal, Collie Sedgemore, Sherry Newman, Marnie Scow, Kurt Locke, William Morrison, Amber Strucken, Beth Haywood, and Iesha Hendersen, who's with us here today. And I'm going to turn it over to Kurt.
Thank you, Charlene. It's nice to see so many of you here. There's a lot of people on this call I was not expecting to see, but glad to. So yeah, thanks for having me as well to present. My name is Kurt, and I'm a facilitator and organizer for PEEP. I've been with PEEP and the BCCDC for about 5 years now. And maybe just jumping back, we can keep the slide here, but on a previous slide, I want to make clear on the distinction on PEEP being an advisory group, primarily for the BCCDC, and not an advocacy group. PEEP does a lot of work just doing like a lot of peripheral things related to drug policy and programming and whatnot at the BCCDC, like updating consent forms or interpreting this bit of data and whatnot. They're in kind of real time for BCCDC staff. But when it comes to like bigger policy issues and whatnot, PEEP's always quick to say we need to work more closely with community-based advocacy groups for this kind of work. So PEEP is meant to kind of complement the advocacy groups as well. So, okay, yes, there are 3 main aims of this study, the This is PEEP study. One is to describe the development of PEEP. Second, to summarize the contributions of PEEP, including publications, reports, and presentations. And third, through qualitative interviews to get insights into what PEEP means to PEEP members, as well as to staff and people who consult with PEEP, and also the impacts of PEEP and suggestions for improvement and the future of PEEP. So this study for me is important for the way it demonstrates PEEP as a model for peer engagement in a way that's authentic and effective. I think so anyways. So for this study, we used a participatory approach. PEEP was involved at every stage and provided valuable input throughout the project. For example, PEEP suggested going beyond interviewing PEEP members to include interviews with the staff and with other groups that consult with PEEP. PEEP requested interviewees receive the interview guide before participating so they could be prepared, come in ready to say what they know about it. And from March to June 2023, the research team obtained ethics, did an environmental scan, including a literature and document review, had discussions with staff to get details about how PEEP developed and collated papers, presentations, and reports that PEEP had been involved with. One-on-one semi-structured interviews were performed by 2 trained students. These interviews were audio recorded and transcribed. And PEEP assisted in choosing quotes and interpretations as well, but we'll give more details on that later. I'll throw it back to Charlene now.
Thanks again, Kurt. So we'll describe the development of PEEP a little bit as we've grown over the years. So the Peer Engagement and Evaluation Project started in February of 2015 with funding from UBC for a year. We reapplied twice to receive funding for a total of 3 years. There were 5 PEEP members in the original group of people, 1 from each geographical health region. A study investigator was Alyssa Greer, and Ashraf Amblani was the harm reduction epidemiologist, and an MPH student, Heather Bridges, with support from the BCCDC and regional harm reduction coordinators. After the success of the original PEEP, BCCDC and the Ministry of Health agreed to provide support and ongoing funding for PEEP. PEEP members requested to keep the acronym PEEP, but change the meaning of the letters to reflect Professionals for Ethical Engagement of Peers. This version of PEEP, is a provincial consultation, advisory, and advocacy group of people with lived and living experience of substance use that we know today. Personnel includes program coordinator Kurt and peer coordinator myself, PEEP members are paid through invoices submitted for 2 1.5-hour Zoom meetings per week and an additional 10 hours for the work outside of those meetings. The rate of pay was $25 an hour, but we've recently increased it to $30. So just a bit of a reflection on, I've been with PEEP from its inception, and just watching the journey and the growth and the membership, and just how we have such amazing people with lived and living experience that sit on this committee. And like Kurt said, we do a lot less advocacy, but certainly people in the roles that they carry and hold in all of the work that people, different lenses of work that people do. I think having the connection with PEEP also helps to strengthen our skills outside of our roles with PEEP. And just, this is a bit of a reflection of the activities. And so starting in 2015 to April of 2018 gives you a little bit of a breakdown of the activities and the outputs that we did there. Moving into May 2018 and ongoing, a little bit of descriptions of the continued work that we do here and some of the outputs. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the papers and stuff that PEEP has contributed to, recognizing here also the naloxone is not enough, which was really important and close to our hearts as people who have lived and living experience with substance use. And then we're reflecting on the 2023 PEEP study, studying the activities and studying the outputs with the development of manuscripts, developing knowledge translation materials, which is a big piece of what PEEP does as well. And I am going to throw it over to my colleague Iesha now for an introduction and a bit of an acknowledgement.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Iesha Hendersen. I go by Iesha or Iesha. It's a lot easier. I am of mixed heritage, Métis, Cree, and European settler. I'm a member of PEEP as a person with lived experience, and I do a lot of work on the downtown east side in various peer and harm reduction initiatives through local nonprofits, and I have my hands in a bunch of different things, as I'm sure we all do. I've been with PEEP for about 1.5 years now, so I am one of the newer members. So our second aim was to summarize the contributions of PEEP by performing an environmental scan to identify publications, reports, and presentations through a literature and document review and discussions with staff. We found 26 articles published in peer-reviewed journals in which PEEP are acknowledged, named in methods and or as co-authors. Of these, 13 were quantitative articles, many using the BC Harm Reduction Client Survey. PEEP is involved in all aspects of the regular BC Harm Reduction Client Survey. So this includes identifying new, timely, and relevant questions, giving input into question wording, and helping to interpret the findings, and providing input into manuscripts and knowledge translation products, including presentations. These are a few examples of the manuscripts published in which people were involved. You know, I think it's really incredible, you know, before becoming a member of PEEP and seeing the work that PEEP has done prior to my involvement. You know, as a person with lived experience, to see my name, you know, as a co-author on any of these types of publications is a pretty amazing experience. And, you know, I can say for myself that is not something I ever thought would be possible. And it's really cool to be able to be included in this as a person with lived or living experience. And I'm going to pass it over to Shar.
Thanks again, Iesha. So if we reflect a little bit on the reports and infographics that we've been talking a bit about. So there were 16 reports and infographics. One was respectful language and stigma, how to involve people who use drugs, peer engagement principles and best practices, paying peers in community-based work, media and language, naloxone is not enough, patterns and preferences, PEEP members via their interviews. A few examples of those here is the language matters. We were talking a little bit earlier about knowledge translation products, which are a lot of contributions from PEEP towards BCCDC and other organizations and agencies as well. But here are some of the examples of the language matters, really shifting the way that we utilize language that can create internal and external stigma. And one of the other ones here is how to involve people who use drugs, just a little bit of a comprehensive understanding of how to authentically engage people who use substances. This is a bit of a review of some of the documents that I've identified. So the peer engagement principles and best practices we see here, paying peers and community, and the peer engagement of BCCDC harm reduction program. And I'm going to throw this over to Kurt again to talk a little bit further.
Thanks, Charlene. Yes, related to the two documents on the left, especially, we've heard from lots of folks that the best practices are now becoming dated. They were made in 2017. They've been really helpful for setting standards for how to work with people with lived experience, but yeah, they need updating. So we are going to correct that. We recently brought on Saren Blauwet, who I think a number of you know, and Marnie Scow will be taking on the task to collect input to help inform some new versions of these, which hopefully will come out probably in about a year from now, we're hoping. And these are some other reports that PEEPs partnered in 2021 in recognition of 1 million kits shipped across BC since the program started in 2012. And 5 years since the public health emergency was declared, PEEP created the Naloxone is Not Enough, Letters from the Heart of the Crisis document. This document shares letters and perspectives from people with lived experience to highlight that although naloxone saves lives, unacceptable and preventable deaths are continuing. So it's a compelling collection of letters that really brings to life the reality of the circumstances of people who use drugs and the need to do so much more to end this horribleness going on. So anyways, that document I think is quite timeless. On the right, the substance use patterns and safer supply preferences among people who use drugs report. It includes findings from the harm reduction client survey and interviews with 6 focus groups, including 40 participants and 47 individual interviews. 67-page report and a 4-page summary infographic and recommendations were developed. The recommendations include speaking to the need for expansion of drugs in our safe supply programs to include heroin, fentanyl, benzos, and stimulants, both in injectable and inhalable forms. It also speaks to the need for government to clear up the roles around safe supply, like what agency is in charge of what, and work to eliminate barriers for more easily accessible safe supply options, and of course, involving people with lived experience throughout all this. That's good. Thanks, Jane. This is the decriminalization report that PEEP created and drove from beginning to end. Unfortunately, while it wasn't blocked, PEEP was not able to post it on the Toward the Heart site, which was unfortunate. But PEEP was going to then post it on the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition site, but during the time of trying to get it up on their normal channels, so much changed in the landscape around decriminalization that the major issues highlighted in this report kind of lost their relevance. So anyways, we might try to revive this document, but it needs a lot of updating and some things, I guess, in decrim need to get sorted out, which I guess we're going to be hearing updates on possibly later today. I'll throw it back to Charlene now.
Thanks, Kurt. Yeah. So just reflecting on some of the PEEP presentations, up to 30 presentations have been recognized, 6 regional, provincial, and national meetings or panels, 24 conferences, local, national, and international. I think there's a picture of myself and Paul Shawnseal there, and Jane and one of the original members of PEEP as well, Sherry with Jane. So today makes 31, and further presentations will occur at the International Conference on Drug Policy in Montreal in June. And also just recognizing the third objective was to obtain reflections of PEEP from PEEP members, PEEP staff, and those who consult with PEEP to identify successes, challenges, and potential improvements. I think it's really important. It's been really, I think, helpful for the newer participants, but certainly very helpful for some of us who've been there since the inception to kind of reflect all of the amazing work that has been done. We quite often get caught up in the inertia of the crisis and the loss and the vicarious and direct trauma that we face. And so having the reflection of what PEEP has been and the journey of PEEP has been a really great process. And I think many of the members that contributed to this were really happy with the outcomes. And then I'm going to throw it back to Jane to talk a little bit more about how the qualitative interviews were conducted.
Great, thanks, Charlene. So we had the interviews were performed by 2 trained students who hadn't been previously involved with or known to PEEP members or the consultants or the staff. So they weren't attached to BC Centre for Disease Control, they were volunteer students. Kiro interviewed all the PEEP members, and Nima interviewed staff and consultants. So we had consistency there between the interviewers. The interviewees, as we mentioned earlier, were audio recorded and transcribed verbatim. We had 9 staff and consultants from local, provincial and national organisations that were interviewed. And that included staff from BCCDC, a postdoc student, and representatives from the Emergency Health Services, the BC Emergency Health Services, Community Action Initiative, and KT. 8 PEEP members were interviewed, and they received a $25 honorarium for sharing their expertise and experiences. The 8 members, PEEP members that were interviewed came from all of the 5 health regions of BC. And we can see that 3 were aged under 35. 3 lived in large urban centres and 5 in small population centres, and all had stable housing. The participants that were interviewed joined PEEP at different times. 3 were from the original PEEP members, so that was from 2016 or earlier. 2 joined in 2019, and 3 joined more recently in 2020 or later, so after COVID had emerged. And PEEP members are busy, not just with PEEP, but all participated in working groups. Many were in provincial and national groups. All PEEP members had presented at local meetings or at provincial conferences. So PEEP has really been out there in the community and also at conferences, making known what they were up to. I'll now talk a little bit about the analysis of the interview data. I won't go into any great detail, but 3 of us, which was Kiro, Nima and myself, engaged in an iterative coding process. So to start with, we each independently open coded the same 2 transcripts, and then we met to compare codes and develop a preliminary framework. We did this online through Zoom, and then we took additional transcripts and applied these to the preliminary framework, and then further revised it. So it was the usual iterative process of qualitative analysis. So I'll now hand it back to Kurt.
Thanks, Jane. So the research team identified 4 major themes, the major themes being what is PEEP, the PEEP process, PEEP outcomes, and the future of PEEP. And from there, the next step was validating the main themes with PEEP at an in-person meeting. Then the research team selected quotes for each sub-theme from interviews with both PEEP members and from staff and consultants from other agencies that worked with PEEP. Next, 2 90-minute Zoom sessions were held with PEEP members to revise theme names and select the most pertinent quotes, which was actually pretty enjoyable to go through. And PEEP members continued to be involved as manuscripts and presentations were developed. So this slide shows the what is PEEP theme, and there's two sub-themes identified as PEEP does meaningful work and the role of PEEP. So by meaningful for PEEP, it's in the sense that being in PEEP is empowering, supporting, confidence creating, and that the work is impactful. For staff and consultants, it's in the sense that working with PEEP is practical, constructive, and inspiring. And yeah, next slide. So PEEP were given pseudonyms to ensure quotes were anonymous. Staff and consultant quotes were combined and numbered 1 to 9 to protect confidentiality. The first two quotes just spoken to. The last quote, PEEP are constructive. When they get into rooms with decision makers, they don't just scream and yell. They're goal-minded, always respectful to people they meet with, but at the same time forceful. So I want to emphasize PEEP members are amazing at the way they've learned to interact with government folks and service providers, being tactful, thoughtful, and respectful, but also assertive and critical. So PEEP knows the point of the work they're doing, and that they always seem to be great at keeping that in front of them. And it's not really just putting on a show for anybody. So this slide shows the sub-themes under the second major theme, PEEP process. Most of the sub-themes came under two headers, consultation process and relationship to the BCCDC. So PEEP basically meets with all the staff at the BCCDC if they're doing work related to harm reduction. And PEEP is great at doing this with the staff at CDC. So, and the staff deserve a lot of credit for meeting with PEEP in a genuine way, at least for the most part. But the consultation process can still be improved. Sometimes some work is still brought to PEEP that's kind of late in the process, or maybe it's in a way where there's some angling towards certain outcomes, but PEEP's mostly wise to this and calls it out when it happens, again, respectfully and constructively. But for the staff, while at times the scrutiny of their work can be unpleasant, they're usually quite appreciative of the way that PEEP brings a context and insight to the work to make it effective. Next slide. So this first quote about process, I have to say PEEP, again, does not let it slide if the engagement is not done meaningfully. So PEEP members should be involved throughout and not just at the end seeking a stamp of approval or as a checkbox. The process should be that PEEP is brought into the conversation from the beginning and not in the middle or near the end of it. And that's from a PEEP member. And it's from a BCCDC staff. I think it's just a real strength to the BCCDC and to people doing research in BC on substance use to have access to PEEP. And then the last quote, again, from a PEEP member. We are not acknowledged in the way or upheld in the way in which we should. We're also not invested in by current leadership or expansion, extension, all of those other pieces. So regarding this, there's obviously a range of appreciation for PEEP, with some valuing their feedback and even being hungry for it, while some perhaps still don't take advantage of PEEP's help when they perhaps should. I want to emphasize, though, that PEEP's value is increasingly being recognized at the BCCDC, at PHSA, and beyond. So I'll throw it back over to Iesha now.
The final two major themes are PEEP outcomes and the future of PEEP. I think it's really important to just highlight, PEEP has created positive change and has the privilege of representing the experiences and needs of others, which is a really powerful impact, in my opinion. Again, being able to participate in that change with just my experience as a person who used drugs is really incredible. And it mentions here too, like the consultation process is not just a checkbox. PEEP shows up prepared and ready to engage collaboratively. And, that's really important to us as a whole. We don't want to be a checkbox. checkbox. We want to be able to participate from beginning to end to really give you our experience, our expertise throughout the whole process. For PEEP members, being part of PEEP has been a source of support in how PEEP relates to each other and also empowering. We do this work day in and day out, and it can be really lonely some days, and being able to come together and connect with people doing the same work in a meaningful way is empowering in itself. And it gives, for me personally, it gives me that sense where I don't feel so lost in the chaos all by myself trying to navigate it. I'm surrounded by people all the time, sure, but being able to connect with other people in different regions who are experiencing similar things makes a huge difference. But it also gives me that ability to be a little more humble, because being in Vancouver, I have a lot more privilege in this work than other locations in the province. For people who work with PEEP, they are getting feedback that impacts the work in a meaningful way. Here's some of the next slide, please, Jane. So here are some quotes under the third theme, the PEEP outcomes. And some of these quotes again have been the names have been changed for confidentiality. So members gain confidence to speak against the bullshit rhetoric they are spewing. I don't think I would have been able to do that before joining PEEP. PEEP input has led to practice changes. There are so many practice changes that have been implemented in our organization solely as a result of engaging with PEEP that we would have never done on our own without discuss our programs and garnered feedback on them. I'm not going to read all of the quotes, but those were two of my favorite out of this slide that I think are really important to highlight. Next, oh, perfect. Now some quotes under the final theme, which is the future of PEEP. Adequate funding and supports are crucial to ensure the sustainability of PEEP. Listening to us, hearing us, validating us, investing in us, both through training, capacity building, funding to expand the work. I would love to see PEEP made up of folks that are full-time, are employed in a full-time capacity where they have vacation and sick time. And my most favorite quote out of these was, every province and territory should have a PEEP-like model where they are asking for representation from drug user advocacy leaders within their province or within their region. Funding and support under the BCCDC is stable at the moment, but it's always a concern. Being a group that is focused on creating change means our mandate can also threaten our existence. We would like to see PEEP groups expand if it can be done in an authentic ways where it is not just a backdoor way to get those check boxes checked, essentially. And in summary, so PEEP plays a critical role at the BCCDC and provincially. The input is used in all stages of harm reduction research, policy, and programs. PEEP's knowledge and skills are known across Canada and are often asked to provide input by national organizations such as CADI and the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction. Staff and organizations that sought consultation from PEEP were positive about PEEP's ability to produce timely and pertinent input through their regular meetings. Receiving provincial funding ensured appropriate payments for peer expertise. PEEP reported many benefits from membership with the group, including mentorship, empowerment, and confidence to speak publicly. However, PEEP shared frustration that they did not know if or how their input was used by the consultants that sought their input. And lastly, PEEP identified their input should be from the start, not at the end as a checkbox or a stamp of approval. So regarding This is PEEP to date, we have presented a poster at BCCDC Research Week in October 2023, presented at PHSA's symposium, and presenting today. We have submitted a manuscript to BMJ Open, which is currently under review, and an abstract has been accepted for a poster presentation at the International Society for the Study of Drug Policy in Montreal for this month. There will be a final report posted on the Toward the Heart website once the manuscript is published. And I'm going to throw it back over to Jane.
had to be me that made the mistake and to try to talk on mute. Thanks, Iesha. As with all studies, there are some limitations and strengths to mention. As the interviewees knew the project was being conducted by BC Centre for Disease Control, there may be respondent bias, but we try to mitigate this by having our interviewers as being non-BCCDC folks, the students. Our findings, another limitation is that our findings apply to PEEP, which is an effective peer advisory group in BC, which has been around for 8 years. Therefore, potentially the transferability of our findings to other groups may be limited if the groups are less well established or in other provinces due to the unfortunate socio-political landscapes that are occurring outside of BC. By including PEEP throughout the entire process of the project, it really ensured that the findings and manuscript are relevant and it increases the validity of the results. The project also benefited from the triangulation, so looking at by including peer members and their perspectives, but the BCCDC staff, but also those who consulted with PEEP from other agencies and organisations. So this really helped us develop a comprehensive understanding of what PEEP was and what it meant to the variety of stakeholders there. And Shah's going to give us a conclusion. You're on mute, Shah.
There we go. I didn't want to leave you alone with that, Jane. So thinking about the conclusion, preventable deaths continue at an unacceptable rate. 2023 was the most fatal year for the toxic drug deaths ever reported in BC, with 2,511 deaths. Peer engagement is recognized as best practices in designing harm reduction programs and practices and tool for policy change, capacity building, and equity. Given the ongoing drug toxicity emergency, it is critical to continue to support and expand PEEP. Just want to reflect a little bit on the journey that I've been with PEEP from its inception and some of the, the slides and the pieces that we talked about today and the uniqueness of PEEP. And I think it is really a valuable a valuable group of people that meet together. There's no competition. I think sometimes we see in drug user organizations, people are vying for funding, they're vying for position, place, those type of things. That doesn't exist within PEEP. And we just have this really beautiful way of supporting each other and including each other and holding each other up in our hard times, but also celebrating as a group our successes and as individual independent members the work that people are doing outside of that scope. And so I just want to throw it back and reflect on the quote that was on the DCRIM document and the realities of people who use substances. And that is, our suffering will end only when we are accepted and supported by society to be people who use drugs. Decriminalization of a small amount of personal use is only a small step towards our freedom from the ongoing injustice of prohibition. Just want to leave people with those thoughts.
Thanks, Shah. And this is just some references. This is the final slide. The full list of papers, reports, and presentations will be available in a final report and in the publication. Before taking questions and having time for discussion, and we've really aimed that we would have at least 15 minutes, and I think we'll be very successful in that. I just wanted to share my own personal reflections, and also I'll then hand it to Kurt and Iesha for their final reflections too. So we often obtain external funding. As a researcher, we get funding from CIHR or Health Canada or the Ministry of Health to support peer-led harm reduction initiatives. But when that funding runs out, even if the program is successful and beneficial, the project just stops. And this is distressing for the investigators, but especially for the peer research assistants and the organizations involved who have dedicated their time, energy, and enthusiasm to share their expertise and really just buy in and give their all for these projects, and then suddenly it comes to an end. So it's really nice today to have been able to share the story of PEEP, which was an initiative which started back in 2015 as a research project, but then showing how beneficial it was and the utility of PEEP. And with great thanks to BC Centre for Disease Control and the ministry, we were able to continue to this day. So it's a good news story, but it's unfortunate that so many excellent projects don't continue. And I just want to say that I am in constant awe of the professionalism that PEEP shows in its encounters, which Kurt described and everybody else has described. And despite frustrations and re-traumatization that constantly PEEP endures, that they are able to be very professional and respond in a very appropriate way, which is why people keep coming and asking for their input and advice. And I think it's also due to the amazing support that they give each other and is provided by the staff as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Kurt for his final thoughts before we open up for questions and answers. And then Iesha, if you've got anything to say at the end too.
Thanks, Jane. I actually didn't have anything ready for that question, but I'll just say, working with PEEP, I've been working in around drug policy, starting the downtown east side since the 90s, and working with PEEP has been such a highlight of my life and working in this field. And first, shout out to Jane, who brought me in to do this work. I know that sometimes maybe seen as somewhat of a difficult person, but Jane brought me on anyways to help move this work forward. The point of PEEP is that I mean, I guess over my time doing this work, often I've come across times where people at high levels haven't been super authentic in the way they engage with peers on the work that they're doing. And joining PEEP, that was the main goal of PEEP. And Jane knew this, just to get some real, authentic, genuine engagement with people with lived experience, because that's how we're going to end the crisis and the horrible circumstances that people with lived experience are dealing with right now. So with PEEP, our main thing is just being practical in the work, is actually principled, and trying to get people to really just be hungry to get the input from people with lived experience to apply to their work. Because yes, we can put together shiny policy tools and whatnot without checking in with people with lived experience. But if we want it to be effective and work on the ground, then this is necessary. And so that's the point of PEEP, is just to help things work better on the ground. And obviously we have still a long way to go with that, as evident by the crisis continuing. And anyways, I'm kind of rambling right now, so I'll throw that over to Iesha.
And Iesha's on mute, but I also noticed that we do have Beth and others.
Jessica's here too. Yeah.
That who are members of PEEP, if they would like to make any comments from their perspective too.
No pressure.
No pressure. Yeah, just if you say anything.
For me, PEEP is just simply like family. I feel supported no matter what I do, and even after PEEP meetings, I always have someone. If I'm having a rough day, there's always someone I can reach out to, because we really support each other beyond PEEP. Like, not just in meetings, but we support each other beyond all our roles. I wasn't prepared for this, sorry.
Well, that's great. Spontaneity.
Yeah, and I'll just hop in. I joined, it's just Lamb here, and I joined PEEP in 2019, and I was a PEEP member before I even started my job at Anchors. And I'm forever and eternally grateful for everything that I have learned from being a part of PEEP. And I carry that into the work that I do. I learned about proper peer engagement here. I learned about advocacy here. And I learned that I have a lot more skills that I didn't even know I had because of PEEP. And I just want to give like a huge shout out to both Jane, because like, you know, Jane, you are like, I've got a little thing on my office wall that says like hashtag what would Jane Buxton do when it comes to like peer engagement, right? Because you've been you've always made me feel like I am the expert, not that I think I'm an expert, right? Like you really empower me in that work. And I want to give a shout out to Kurt as well, because Kurt, you've been a huge mentor in the time that I've been doing this work. It doesn't matter what it is. I know that I can reach out and ask a question, whether I feel it's a little question or a big question, and you always get back to me. And same with you, Charlene. You know, I see you guys as like the leaders who are setting an example for the rest of us, and we get to carry that into community and support the people who use drugs in communities. So I'm just forever grateful to be a part of this, be a part of PEEP.
Yes.
I just wanted to, sorry, my mute button was evading me before, and I don't know, my computer then froze and it didn't want me to unmute. But just to, you know, add on to what Jess is saying, like I need to say, and I think that thank you for Jess for mentioning this, because you know this work can be devastating and it can be heartbreaking, and it can feel like, you know, you're in a room that's burning and all you've got is a tiny bucket of water at times. And you know, I had to make the decision last year, and I'd say last year was by far the hardest year of my career, to take a step back from work and take a leave of absence to take care of myself. And, you know, being able to share that within PEEP, and to be heard and to be validated and to be supported was everything for me. And I could be vulnerable, I could be a mess, and you know, to have that support and people say, yeah, you know what, I'm feeling that too. And I think sometimes in this work, we feel like we need to be superheroes and we can't be vulnerable or show that it's affecting us too deeply. And that, in my opinion, is BS. And to be able to connect with people and to go through the trials and tribulations and the heartbreak and the devastation, but then also celebrate those little wins, because PEEP reminds me constantly that, you know what, we actually do need to celebrate those little wins, because they're big in this game, because that's what the government treats this like, is like a game, even though it's, you know, our lives. And I can't speak highly enough about PEEP and, you know, the different groups across BC coming together, and for all the work that we all do, and how empowering it is to be able to stand next to everybody and come together with this shared goal. And it's pretty incredible. And the support is everything.
Thanks, Iesha. And obviously a big shout out to CoLab too, who get us together and give us the opportunity to share. So thank you again. I can see Lynn has a hand up, and then we'll just take it. And I notice there is some news that is really not surprising.
Maybe I can just end out the recording right now and just say thank you so much for everybody's commitment to PEEP for the last couple of years. Or 8 years. It's been amazing. And I'll turn off the recording and we can have more of a thoughtful discussion from there.